Have you ever wondered why there's so many different kinds of types of whiskey? You know, like bourbon and Scotch and rye and single malt and like blend and all those different types. And I'm just Caleb Stowers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what each of those are. So, start with Scotch. Everybody kind of knows what Scotch is. Everybody's probably drank Scotch once in their life. Basically, that is made up of malted barley, which is kind of like, just basically like the grass you see in movies flowing in the wind, like Gladiator. Um, to be called Scotch, it has to be aged in oak casks for at least 3 years, which is just the big oak barrels that you see on like movies or pictures of TV shows and whatnot. Lastly, to be called Scotch, it has to be made in Scotland, which is kind of like the main difference between all these different types of whiskeys, is just where it's made. Next, you got bourbon, which is made up of at least 51% corn to be called bourbon. The rest of it's made up of barley, rye, and wheat, and different mixtures and different ingredients like of that. Also, it has to be made in charred oak casks, so rather than just regular, it's charred on the inside, which kind of gives it that extra little bite and like flavor of just bourbon. After that, you have blend whiskey, which is kind of like every kind of whiskey that you can think of, just kind of put together. It's usually more grain whiskey than malt, but it's got more malt in it. It's usually more expensive, which makes it taste better. After that, you have rye whiskey. Rye whiskey has to be made up of at least 51% rye. Can't be more than 160 proof. It also has to be aged in oak casks, but this is not aged less than 3 years, so it's less than like bourbon or Scotch or any of those other types of whiskeys, which gives it less flavor from the oak casks. So basically, that's just the different like types of whiskey and why they're called that and how they're made. Really, the only difference is where they're made or whether they're made up of corn or malt, grain or malt. Not a big difference. It all burns whenever you drink it. It's all the same color, but the charred oak and regular oak and how long it sits for, it does give it different flavors and different aspects of the drink. But basically all the same thing, but that's the main differences.